Hey guys, and welcome back. So we're going to create a very simple basic walk cycle, just something along these lines. Uh, in Animation 2, we'll get into some more interesting walk cycles, but right now we're going to create something together that's going to be a basic walk cycle like this. Okay, so first off, there's a couple things that I want you to be aware of. And let's get to Blackboard. There If you come to syllabus and resources, and let's go to resources after spring break, round 2, and lesson 1 for your assignment. There will also be a video link, but since I'm making the video right now, that is not up here, but I'll have a video link for this video as well. But I'll also send that in the email and also in Discord and stuff like that. But I also want it to be available in Blackboard. Okay, so if we click on the little assets folder, there will be one extra thing that I'm going to put in here that I haven't put in here yet, and I have some notes on the walk cycle on how we're going to step through and so forth. Now, what I would say is don't get ahead of the videos with the notes, and the reason being is because we're going to create some buttons, and if you try to jump ahead of the videos before we've made a certain button, it's going to get really kind of convoluted, and it might be a little harder for you. So use the notes, use the videos, but yeah, hopefully this will be helpful. The other thing I'm going to mention too is I'm going to try to keep a fairly good pace because I don't want these videos to get super long, right? I don't want you feeling like if I give you like an 8-hour video, like you have to watch an 8-hour video. So I want to keep this at a good pace. I also want to make sure I'm hitting all the high points, but I also want the videos to be as condensed as possible. So if you have questions or if I went too fast on an area, let me know, and I could even potentially do some patch videos or maybe some Zoom sessions where we talk some things out a little bit. Okay, so in Blackboard, I'll also put the notes in here too, so you'll have this set of notes. But you're going to have the Boney rig. I want you to use the Boney rig, if at all possible. If this is just erroring out and you cannot open it, then you can use the jerry rig. But the notes were not made for the jerry rig; they were made for the Boney rig. So as you get into some of the poses, there's some specific values and things like that would not apply to jerry. So I think it'll be a little bit easier if you use the Boney rig. And as I march through the videos, that's what I'm going to be using, and I think it'll just be easier for you. Again, if you absolutely can't do it, just use the jerry rig and follow along as best you can. Okay, the next thing that will also be in here is the Animator's Survival Kit. It's a great book. I would recommend getting that, especially if you're interested in continuing or pursuing animation in your future. It's just an amazing book. It really is. So I pulled out a resource out of that. Let me see if I can find that. And this is the resource, right? It breaks down a walk cycle. And it breaks down several different walk cycles, and it breaks down all sorts of stuff throughout the book. And so it's an amazing resource, and we're going to actually use one of the resources. I'm going to show you how to utilize this inside of Maya. And so, yeah, if you get the book and you're trying to animate other things, you'll have a basic understanding of how to use this as a resource and get it into Maya and stuff, even just through this exercise. Okay, so let's go ahead and jump into Maya. First things first, my recommendation would be to download the Boney rig fresh and just use this. Because if you've set your guy up to have like IK arms, and if you remember, IK arms are where we just grab and do that. If you remember how to switch this back to FK, that's great. You could potentially do that. But again, my recommendation, just go ahead and download it fresh. Okay, because IK arms and this sort of stuff is not going to work. It will, but it's not gonna be a very good animation just because we want to use FK arms. So again, IK, you won't see any circles except the red ones on the wrist, and this is not what we want. Okay, so download it fresh, and so that you have something like this. Okay, And so what we're going to do is we're going to use FK for our arms, right? And that's where you animate by rotations. And then we're going to use IK for the feet, and that's where you can like position things and that sort of stuff, which is great for anytime you need to like stick your feet somewhere, like in walking, right? They stick to the ground and that sort of stuff. Okay, so let's go ahead and keep moving on. So yeah, you have this as a resource. Refer back to that. You have the assets. I'm not going to go over the Boney stuff as much. Just know that, or the jerry rig as much. Just know that what we do with Boney, the same principles will work with Jerry. Okay, so let's go ahead and dive right in. The one thing that we want to do is we want to make sure that as we animate through this, so if we set a pose on frame 1 and we set another pose on frame 5, Maya will typically, just as its default setup, try to start blending, doing an animation blend from frame 1 to frame 5. And we don't want that at the very beginning. We want this to hold that first pose until it gets to frame 5. Yes, when we click play, if we have a bunch of poses, it'll feel very choppy, okay? Almost like your guy's in a strobe light or something like that. It'll feel very choppy. And that actually is what we want at the beginning. And the reason why is because pose to pose is one of our 12 principles. And if we have interpolation, it's going to muddy up. And if I hand this off to my art director and I have interpolation at the very beginning, he's not going to be able, or he or she is not going to be able to evaluate the poses that I've created, because they're not going to know what's an animation blend and what's an actual pose, okay? And so you want to start blocking out your animation in the very beginning so that you can then hand that off to your director or your art director or whatever the case may be. And yes, eventually we'll want to do some animation blends, but that's not where we start. Okay, so to set that up, if we go all the way down here to the bottom right, you'll see this little orange dude with the gear. You want to click on that. And then you want to come and you want to see like settings and animation. And for your tangents, you want to set this up to match mine. So you want to click here. You'll want weighted tangents, so just go ahead and select that. And then default in, you're going to want to go to flat. And default out, you're going to want to go to stepped. So weighted, flat, in, out, stepped, and save. Okay. And this will essentially allow us to do blocking out types of animation. And so that's going to be helpful for us. Okay, so the next thing we want to do is we want to create buttons for our character. And what the button is going to do is it's going to select all the curves of our character. So we can just click a button and then we can select the keys as we want. So first off, let's go ahead and get this ready for that. Okay, so if we come up to the very top, you will see some icons like this, okay? Now, for our character, if I drag a big box around him, it's actually going to work okay, and it's just going to give me the curves, and that's going to work perfectly for our character. Now, if you have a different character that you're going to work with, and this should actually be fine for Jerry, but there might be other rigs that you work with that if you drag a box, you might like get their hat or something like that too. So there is up here, and if I collapse this little toggle right here, you can see that it either hides this, or like right there it's hidden, or I have it open right there. So if you have a different character, for Boney, don't worry about it. But for other characters, if you turn everything off but for the curves, then as you drag a box in here, you'll know that you're only getting the curves. But for Boney, I'm going to leave all that on, so you don't need to change that. Okay. So, but that was just more of an FYI for another character. If you're running into those issues, you could just toggle it all off and only leave on curves, and then you could do that. And we're going to use this method by selecting curves, and here Maya is actually writing code for us anytime we do anything. So as I select all these curves, Maya is writing the code for that. And so we're going to actually steal that code and put it in a button up here. And so let's look at how we would do that. So I'm just going to click off of this. And if we come down here, we'll see this little icon that has a little semicolon in it. I'm going to click on that semicolon, and that's going to bring us to our script editor. Now, a quick note about this. If you look at your tabs, you will notice that there is a Mel tab and a Python tab. The code that we are going to steal and use will not work in the Python tab. So you want to make sure that you are in the Mel tab. Okay, so make sure that you are in the Mel tab and you should be good to go. And so you probably don't have anything down here. If you do, that's fine. But you probably have a ton of stuff up here. And as you can see, if I click on a curve or a different curve, right, it's writing code right there. And so this is saying select, replace whatever is already selected with this, with the left wrist control, right? Or if I click down here, like select, replace whatever what was selected now with the left ankle control, right? And so this is just writing code for us. Now, I want to get rid of everything up here and in here. If I click this button up here, it'll erase everything up here. If I click this button right here, it'll erase everything right here. If I click this button right here, it's going to erase everything. So this is Maya writing code for us, and then down in this window is where we can type our own code. Okay, so essentially what I want to do, let me kind of get this view over here where I can see everything. I'm just going to drag a big box around everything, and I'm going to get all my curves. Well, Maya recorded that in code, so I'm just going to click up here in this top window, and I'm going to do Control A for all, and Control C to copy, and then I'm going to click down in this window, and I'm going to do Control V as in Victor to paste. And so I just took this code up here and essentially transferred it down here. Now, making sure that we are in our animation tab, right? So if you're in like poly modeling, you're going to want to make sure you're in your animation tab. Since I clicked out of this window, I'm just going to click on this bar just to get the script editor kind of back and active. I've got that set up. All right, cool. So I'm just going to click down in this window, and I'm going to do Control A to get all this selected. And once all this is selected down here, I can go to File, right here, Save Script to Shelf, and I'm going to call this, so this is the button's label, but it will clip it. So you have to come up with like little shorthand. So I'm going to do SL for select, capital C, R, V, S for curves, and click OK. And so now I have a little button. So if I click off of everything and I click this little button, it's going to select all my curves. And essentially, every time I make a pose, I want to click this button, and then I'm going to click S to set a keyframe. All right, cool. So I'm going to go ahead and close this now. And yeah. All right, so let's keep moving on. Oops. Okay, the next thing we want to do is we want to get the Animator Survival Kit, that this resource right here, into Maya. And the way we're going to do that is we want to put that into, it's set up facing this way, right? So we want it, right? We don't want it this way, we want it this way. And the way we're going to do that is if you hold your space bar down and you left click, you'll get this little window up, okay? And we want to go to the one that says left view, okay? So he is facing this way, right? And that guy's facing that way. All right, cool. So from here, we want to get that image imported. And so we're in this view. We want to go to View right here, down to Image Plane, and Import Image, okay? And you can navigate and find it. Since I already have that here, I'm just going to go copy this path, and I'm going to paste it in here. And then I'm going to go grab that walk cycle resource. Cool. Now, problem is it went right in front of our dude. I can't see our dude. And so I want to get it onto the other side. So I'm going to come and I'm going to just click our perspective, main perspective window to get back. And you might be wondering, where is it at? Well, if you rotate all the way over here, you can see it's like way off in the distance. So I'm going to click on the image plane right here. And I'm going to come to translate X. It says like -900 something. I'm just going to click in there and type 100 for translate X. So again, we're in our channel box layer editor. I can see the translate X. So don't forget about these little tabs on the side. So we're in the channel box layer editor. Okay, cool. So let's go back to our left perspective view. So spacebar, left click, and choose left. And from here, this is great, but it's like tiny, and I want to match it up so that he's like sitting right on top of these dudes. And so image plane over here is selected. I'm going to click, and we can do 3 and 3 and 3. You can click and drag and just type 3 once, but yeah, that's cool. So essentially we want 3, 3, and 3. Okay, I'm going to come and I'm going to click on the image plane again. Now, I know that this dude's feet, like right underneath his feet, is the ground plane. And so with the image plane selected, I can see that their ground plane is here and my dude's ground plane is here. So with the move tool, I'm just going to pull this down so that it looks like my dude is now standing on their ground plane. So essentially, Maya's ground plane and this image's ground plane now will match. Okay? And so we're just going to do something like that. Cool. And so from here, this is looking great. The next thing I want to do, I'm going to just zoom out by rolling out a little bit with my mouse button, is I just want to move this whole image plane over. And so image plane is still selected. I just want to grab this arrow that's pointing forward, and I want to match it. So, and I'm looking at the hips, not the head, right? Because he's bent over, and he's going to straighten up, bend over at different times. So I'm really trying to match up where the hips are roughly. So I'm going to match that up. And our dude is essentially matched up to our resource. And so our resource is in here, and we're ready to start animating. Okay, so what I want to do is, I think it's going to be hard if we only animate from this view, so I want a split screen. So I want this view in one screen, and I want my regular perspective in the other screen. And if we come over here, you'll see these little buttons right here. Well, there's this one right here that has like a little plus on the left and like a dark diamond on a white box right there. So I'm just going to click that little button right there. And so this view is perfect. This is exactly what I want. This view, I need to get back to the left. So I'm going to hover my mouse over this side. I'm going to click spacebar again and left click. And we're going to go to left view. Okay. Okay, cool. And so this is the view that I want. I got this view, and I've got this view. Now I'm going to be a little honest. I don't like the grid from this view. I do like it here because it gives me a ground plane, and I want to make sure that my character's stuff always matches that ground plane. I've got that over there, but it's nice to have one in this view too. The problem is over here, though, it's just too noisy, or it's just too much going on for me for right now for this. So there's a little button right here that you can toggle on and off your grid. And I'm going to turn off the grid in this view. And I'm going to leave it on in this view. All right, cool. So at this point, we are ready to start animating our character. So we'll just double check our notes. So we've done the initial setup. We've got our survival kit resource in there. We set up our dual screens. And now we're ready for the first pose. So you can see that I'm using, that I created these notes based off of this workflow that we're going to do. And so you can use these notes as well to kind of step through as well. Just don't go past the videos. Okay, so at this point, I think we are good to start working on our first pose. All right, so let's go ahead and jump right into our animation. So again, I tend to like to work from the ground up. So I'll work on like this big controller and then do the hips. And not that I won't come back down and like rework the legs or something like that, but I tend to work in a direction that I'm going up and come back down and adjust things as needed. So first off, let's go ahead and pull this down a little bit. So I'm going to pull that down by -2. And then I'm going to roughly position these feet in place. Now, one thing to be careful about is you don't want to like have your feet like cross the midline. So you're going to want to use these arrows to pull up or forward. Or there's this little plane right here that you're going to want to use, and that'll keep things from going across his midline. And so I'm just going to roughly position that into place. Do the same thing with this back ankle. Now, keep in mind, like things don't have to match perfectly to this character, right? It doesn't have to be exactly 100% like inside the lines, because whatever character you're working with may not have the same proportions and things like that as this character that they've drawn in the background. Okay, so another thing that you're really going to want to do is try to avoid like where that leg completely like pops, right? You want it to be straight, but you don't want it to pop, because you will see that in your animation if it actually pops. All right, cool. The next thing is we want to rotate this hip towards the back a little bit. So we'll round that to like 20. And then this leg back here is pushing up on the hip a little bit. So we want to rotate that up, and it's rotating a little on the X. I don't want that. We'll just do 5. And change the rotate Y. So 20 and 5. And yeah, I think that looks good. I'm going to adjust these legs a little bit. Just a hair. And then I'm going to rotate the spine forward a little bit. So on the X, type 11. Cool. And then we want to rotate, like as the arms swing, they're going to, right? Our body is also going to counteract our hips, right? So if our hips rotate that way, we want to counteract it by having our spine 2 kind of rotate in a little bit. And so our spine 2, let's set that to like a -5. And then I'm going to rotate the arms down. And just FYI, this is about the farthest in the position of the arm swing. And keep in mind too that you're going to want a little bit of follow through. Okay, so as the arm comes up and swings, there's going to be a little bit of follow through where the wrist rotates a little bit at the end as well. Rotate that down. Rotate that. Don't want the elbow to completely pop. But again, there might be like a little bit of follow through on the wrist or something along those lines. All right, cool. So you can do whatever you want and continue to play with and do more. I'm really not going to use this spine 3 so much. I'm just going to skip that for now. But for the neck, the problem is like with what we've got right now. If I rotate like this, you can see how like the head is just at the mercy of where everything is rotating. Where in reality, we want the head to always face forward. And so whatever we do with this spine 1 and this spine 2, we need to do the opposite to the head. Okay, so I'm going to click on spine 1, and you can see we've got rotate X at 11. So I'm going to click on this. I'm going to put rotate X at -11. Okay, and so now you can see like his head is just facing forward. And then here I'm going to click on spine 2. We've got -5 on the Y. So I'll click on that, and then I'll put a +5 on the Y. And essentially, we now have our first pose done. So what we want to do is we want to click this button right here. Okay, so we've got that button clicked. Now the problem is I'm on frame 16, so I want to make sure that my frames match the frames that I'm about to set a key on. Okay, so got this set to frame 1. This is set to frame 1. And I'm good to go. Okay, so select curves button, and we've got all the curves selected. I'm going to click S to set a key, and we are good. Okay, so the next thing I want to do is I want to move on to our second pose. So I'm going to come to this view, and I'm going to grab, so I'm using my move tool, and I'm just going to grab this, and I'm going to push it just with this arrow so that the hips kind of match up with frame 5. So immediately, let's go to frame 5, right? So you don't want to start doing poses and then be like, oh no, right? And then click on frame 5 and lose all your poses. Now, I showed you guys the trick about the middle click, but yeah, I'd hate for you to do a bunch of posing work and lose it. So it's always just good to just work as clean as you can. So this is set to frame 5, and then our timeline is set to frame 5. And so let's work our second pose. And so for our second pose, let's go ahead and select our big root curve. Okay. And for this is the down pose, so we want to pull this down a little bit more. And so we'll do that at like negative, let's do negative, -4 is what I have in my notes. So we'll stick with -4. And so from there, that looks good. The other thing to know too is that as you take a step, right, you actually start to go into the direction of that foot, right? Because you're actually kind of doing a controlled fall. And so we want them to fall towards the foot. And so we'll put that translate x at -1. Cool. And then for the legs, let's go ahead and just get that matched up as best we can. So we'll put that back to 0. Go to our move tool and get that roughly into place. And I'll click on this, unrotate that toe, and then we'll just position this foot into place. Cool, so I think that's looking pretty good. And so now we just want to come up to our hips, and we want to, on our hips, we want to go ahead and rotate our Y to about 10. And so the hips are going to start straightening out a little bit, okay? They're still rotated a little bit in that direction, but not completely. Okay, and so then for the Z, okay, the Z, our hips are going to start to really rotate this direction because we're putting weight up on that hip. And so for our Z, let's put that at -4. Okay, and so you can see that we're starting to put some weight up on that hip. All right, cool. And so let's go ahead and work on our arms a little bit. So our arms should be somewhere, kind of, right, because we haven't gotten to the follow through yet. Somewhere here. There wouldn't be as much follow through on that. And then the same thing here. We're just going to pull those in a little bit. Pull that a little bit. There wouldn't be as much follow through there yet either. Okay, so something like this. The pose before, they were at their furthest point. They're kind of right here, and then we'll have like a midpoint as well on our next set for our arms. Okay, so let's move on to our spine. And so I'm going to click on spine 1, and he is leaning forward a little bit more, so we'll lean him forward a bit more. Round that to 15. And then for spine 2, we don't want it quite as far rotated on the Y. We'll bring that back a bit, maybe -3. And I think that's what I have in the notes. Yep. So, okay, that looks good. And so, again, we would just want to come back through and look at what we're doing on spine 1. So we've got 15. And here, we want this to be -15, right? Because we're going to do the opposite. So if this is +15, the X needs to be -15. And if this is -3 for spine 2 on Y, this will need to be a +3. So put that to +3. And cool, we essentially got our frame 5 pose. So frame 5, let's click our little button that we've made and click S to set a keyframe. And so now we're just going to rinse and repeat until we get to frame 13. Okay, so we got 2 more poses to build for this week's lesson, and then we'll pick it up on 17 for next week's, because we're going to make a button to help us with that. Okay, so let's click on our image plane, and let's move this to match 9. So again, I'm trying to match hips. And then again, out here, I immediately want to go to frame 9. And now we're ready to work on our third pose. All right, cool. Kind of zoom back in here. And so again, I tend to work from the ground. Okay, so I'm going to come to this, and as you can see, he's starting to raise up, right? So I'm going to pull this up, okay, and I'm going to pull that up to about 0 might be okay, but in the notes I've got -0.4, so that looks okay. And now I'm just going to pull this back a little bit. Okay, match those feet up a little bit, and then I'm going to match this foot up a little bit. And so you can see that I'm working from this view. It's not that I never work from this view, but typically speaking, I'll work in this view and watch what's happening over there. All right, cool. And so now we've got our root set. And the other thing I might do, let's put our y actually at -0.4 on the y, and that's actually 0. I didn't have those numbers in the right place. Okay, so we've got -0.4 here, and then on our x, let's put that to -2, because essentially he's really going to be moving over this leg as that pushes up, right? And if you guys remember, if you do that center of gravity, it should come down over that base of support. So if he's here, really this wouldn't be good, right? He's not maintaining balance, because right now this foot has all the weight, and so you want to make sure that that center of gravity stays over the base of support. And so that's just something to really kind of be cognizant about. And so we're just making sure that that leg doesn't pop. And I think it's going to be fine because we're going to adjust this hip a little bit. And so if I click on this hip, what I want to do is I want to rotate our Y a little bit. And we're going to rotate this back in this direction. And we'll set the Y to like 5. And then for our Z, that's actually going to be okay. And so honestly, as I'm looking at this, I think this actually needs to come down a hair. So this may not match the notes perfectly, but we don't want that knee to pop. Okay, and I'll try to make that adjustment in the notes. So it looks like I've got that at -1. Yeah. So we're going to want the root control to be at like a -1. Okay, not a -0.4. Okay, and I'll make that adjustment in the notes and get that sent to you guys. Okay, so I think that looks good. Now, as we come up, let's go up to our spine 1. Okay, and for spine 1, we're going to want to rotate the X. We're going to want to rotate this back up a little bit. Okay, because he's starting to straighten out in here. So let's rotate that up. Put that to about 5. Okay, and then for our spine 2, let's just go ahead and 0 that out. So he's just kind of facing forward. And then again for the neck, we're going to want to do the opposite. So rotate X needs to be -5. And then our rotate Y should be 0. Cool. Okay, and then let's fix our arms. So our arms should be technically really, really close. So let's pull those in. Okay, let's pull those really, really in. Rotate that arm a little bit. We might want a little bit of fall right there. And this. Essentially, these arms are going to be by their sides. Okay. And okay, I think we've got our third pose right there. So I'm going to do select curves. And we're on frame 9. Frame 9. and I'm going to click S to set a key. Okay. Okay, and now we're ready for our next frame. Now, if we look at this, you'll see as I scrub through this, right, the poses are pretty choppy, but that's okay because we want this to really be a blocking out type animation. Okay, so now we're going to go to frame 13. Okay, and for frame 13, let's go ahead and also select our image plane, and let's move that back. So let's just match those hips up. And cool. So let's go ahead and work our fourth pose here. And so again, I tend to work from the bottom up. And so we're going to need to raise him up a little bit on our Y. And so I'm going to pull that Y up to maybe around a 1. Okay. And then I'm going to go ahead and start working on the legs a little bit. So I'm going to roll that toe a little bit. Cool. Then I'll grab the ankle and let's pull that somewhere like that. And then for this foot, let's go ahead. And again, remember, you want to avoid doing things like that, right? So you want to make sure that you're using just these arrows or that plane. So I'm going to pull that and maybe start to rotate that a little bit. Pull that back in. Maybe something like that. Starting to look good. Okay, and then let's come to our hip. And for the Y, let's go ahead and rotate that a little more this way. So we want to go to, right? Because we're getting ready to take a step, so this foot is going to start going forward, and so we want to rotate that hip so that as that leg starts to go forward. So we'll do something like -20. Cool. And then for our Z, let's, I think that's fine. Okay. And then let's go up to our spine 1. And so for our spine 1, let's put that, because as his weight, as he's pushing up, you would kind of think that he'd been like a little forward. Okay. So we'll do like 8. Okay. And then for spine 2, so if we click on spine 2, let's rotate our Y to counteract our hips a little bit, and we'll put that to like a 5. Cool. And now our arms, we should start to rotate like this, right? They should be still fairly close, but not exactly at the side, okay? And so we've got that. And as I'm looking at this leg, I kind of want to push this back a little bit. And I might rotate that toe down a little bit more. Something like that. I'll pull that forward as much as possible. I want to get that back as much as possible. All right, cool. All right, so spine 2, I think that was okay. And so we want to come again and look at spine 1, right? And that's 8, so the head should be -8. Or for spine 1 and then -8. Okay, and then spine 2, Y is 5, so this should be -5. All right, cool. And so essentially we have our next set of poses for our character. So we're on frame 13. This is on frame 13. Let's click our little curves button, and let's click S to set a key. And so now we have these 4 keys that are blocked out for our first part. And so next week we're going to pick this back up from this contact pose, and we're going to go through the rest of the contact poses, and we're going to get our blocked out animation. So Hopefully this has been helpful. So at this point, I'm not going to have you guys submit this quite yet. I'm going to have you submit it at the end with the full walk cycle. But yeah, if you have an opportunity and you can get that up on Discord, I'd love to see where it's at, and or if you have any questions. But at this point, yeah, we should be good. So we've got the first part of our walk cycle essentially blocked out. All right, cool.